you know, Eddie Coster, a lot of the guys who were great players, who were kind of studio players, but they really were the players in the clubs. The clubs were still alive, you know. Billy Taylor would be playing on a date. Herbie played on dates, and we looked at each other the other day, and I said, yeah, you remember I played on that, what was that girl singer's name? And we went through some just amazing things in how you got somebody who was so good to play a little softer, because there was no choice. Everything was live. We built one of the early booths at A&R for vocals. It was a Diane Carroll album. I never forgot it. She sang this loud, just that intimate. Because after the Gilberto thing, I said, you know, I became known as the guy you want to record with an acoustic guitar and a vocal. You know how hard that is? I mean, I built a neck piece for Paul Simon. He does the same thing. He doesn't sing very loud. And I think it was the jazzers that taught me the instinct of paying attention to every minute. This was not the date you kind of took it and you put your arms back and let it roll. I mean, you still have your hands on the board. There's no way that you can make a good record without mixing. It's what the art is. And it's so subtle that you don't step on it. But I give all the credit to the players. I don't think any one of us could be as well known, because it's not an ego trip. You're in there, you're in the same chair as the player, and he expects you to capture it. Yeah. You don't want to turn to Randy and say, by the way, that's slightly distorted. Excuse me? My greatest solo? I came here, it's 5 o'clock, I've got to be out of here because that's what the rules were. And I think musicians that we recorded with, arrangers, boy, if they trusted your studio, you had a gig. And I mean, all of us, I mean, he started with pretty much the same time, even though he's a little younger. But we lived on tips. Would you believe that? When you did a really cool job, a guy threw you a 20. Woo! That was all right. Wow.
So, and Al, you feel the same way, that it was the early jazz experience?
I talk a lot at schools and all. I have to tell your best friend as an engineer or a producer in the studio is the musician sitting out there. And the first thing, and this is something I learned when I first started, is to make sure that guy is comfortable. If he's comfortable and can hear well, and there's a good environment, and you have a smile on your face, and you're not grumpy because you had a bad night, it changes his whole attitude of what's going to happen in the studio. They tend to play better. Everything tends to harmonize more. And so it's just the environment of getting, and I think I learned that from, doing all these jazz records all my life, And the communication that guys like Ahmet Ertegun and those guys had with the musicians, and the breaks and the jokes and the little storytelling that goes on. It's not all strictly music all the time. There's some social things that go on that are very important to the process of making a record.
So let me just ask one more thing, and then we'll see if there's some questions from the audience, because I'm still trying to get my arms a little bit around this question of how the changes have affected the way we hear. And maybe the way to do that is to go at it from another angle. You, musicians, Kurt, Esperanza, Randy, you still perform, obviously, in live settings. In the old days, I guess the difference between a recording and a club date was simply that there wasn't an audience there, but from what you're describing, it was pretty much performed in the same spirit. Now there seems to be a distinct dichotomy between the way you make a record and the way you perform for people in a live setting. So what is your sense of the different ways in which you're perceived in those settings? I mean, people have heard your recordings and talked to you about it, but then they come up to you in a club.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I think is becoming increasingly pervasive, and that is, and it touches on a couple of things. Something Randy was talking about, how people aren't going to know how to listen to music at all, and it touches on all the technological stuff that we've been talking about, and that is that in the larger culture, I think a lot of music fans are coming to expect that the acts that they, even the ones that they like, when they go to hear that act live, if they sound as good as the record, it's because basically the record is being performed and not performed by live people. They're being danced and lip synced to, and they're being performed in a way, but it's not.
They're not singing.
They're not really
playing.
singing, or the musicians are playing with a click, or they're regurgitating a thing they've worked out. This is the show. This is what we do, and so, and I've heard this at a lot of other jazz events, not my own, so I'm not talking about myself, but I've heard many times people who come to a jazz concert, they'll say, "Wow, that's even better than the record." I mean, I didn't think you guys could play like. I didn't think anybody could play like this. And it's because their expectations have been altered, because the technology allows people of questionable, sometimes questionable, true, what we would traditionally think of as talent, to come in with certain kinds of experts and other kinds of collaborators that can create a product, a musical product, that sounds so far in excess of what some of the people, I don't mean to cast a, too broad of an aspersion, but I think it's changing the way people listen to music, whether they listen to it on recordings or whether they listen to it in a live setting. They expect the recording to be perfect in a certain kind of a way now.
It also changes, if I can interrupt briefly, it changes the way that younger people write music, too, because I get things set in front of me that make my eyeballs pop out, because it's just not musical or playable. It's just a bunch of synth notes that somebody put in or somebody programmed, and they have to explain, this is not endemic to the trumpet, or it doesn't fit with this instrument. So that's also, it works both ways.
And both of those things having been said, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, an appropriate amount of pitch fixing, an appropriate amount of editing, an appropriate amount of technological sonic enhancement in the hands of an expert can help your music sound better than you ever expected it could. Because when you as a performer are playing it, this room sounds a certain way. You don't have a perfect sonic experience listening back to your own composition until you go in and you record it and you listen back, and all the parts are audible and they all sound as beautiful and more beautiful than you imagined that they could. So I mean, it's a balance, as there always has been, between what we're able to do and what we should do.
Esperanza.
Yeah, I was just going to continue on what Randy was saying, there's a whole level of education that young musicians don't ever have to get to, because there's a lot missing from performance, because you always have this thing to fall back on. I mean, everything from the balance that you come into the studio, being able to sing your whole track or play your whole track completely or compose something that you know is playable. There's so many levels that you never have to even think about, because you know that it's going to be handled by all these tools that we have. So in one way, probably it affects the most the way people learn music from the beginning. There's always these safety nets that even your teachers may not get to, because they want to be up on the next level of technology too. It's huge. And just what he's saying, there's a lot of musicians that when you go see them play, it doesn't sound anything like the record. It's almost weird. You're like, well, wait a minute, Jack, because musicians don't have to get to that level. And because probably a lot of listeners can't tell the difference because it's so watered down, they might not even notice on a certain level that difference, because it's based on these MP3 things that they're hearing on their iPods, right? Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I'm going to say that as we kind of wrap this up a little bit, that while we've gotten to talk about and hear some of the changes in technology over the last 50 years, we can see that they provide a lot of opportunities for good things and a lot of problems, and without really some careful stewardship could lead to a situation where generations to come will not hear music the way we all know it ought to be heard and made. And I guess that's something of a challenge for us to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we hope not, though.
Yeah. We do want to save a little time for questions, and Jim has a microphone over there, so if there's anybody who wants to speak up, please.
Hi, my name is Judy Rafat. I'm a jazz vocalist from Germany, and I have a couple of questions for the experts and also for Kurt Elling. First of all, I'd like to tell a little weenie story. which made me kind of laugh because I recorded a tribute to Dizzy Gillespie in New York in NOLA Studios, and we had some music where Paquito de Rivera was doing doing solos, and we were in the studio with Ignacio Baroa, and all of a sudden I get this telephone call from Brenda saying, look, Paquito's not going to make it. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, because he cannot perform in the studio when Ignacio is there. So we had to get all of the recording done and have Ignacio, have Paquito come in after the recording was all finished and get everybody out of the studios so that we could have Paquito play on this record. So if it weren't for this 24-track possibility, we wouldn't have had Paquito on the record. So now to the questions. I would like to know from Kurt Elling and also from the experts here in the studio, what do you suggest, or what would you prefer when you when you're performing, when you are, what do you call that in English?
Recording.
Recording, thank you very much. Do you still think that it would be good to do analog, or do you think it's, now that we're up to date in this day and age, to do definitely digital? So I did an analog, and I don't know, I think it's warmer and it has a better feeling than
Okay, well,
digital.
let's let them take a shot.
And
at that.
also, what microphones do you suggest when you're in studio for singers?
I generally use whatever microphone Al wants me to use. Because we test out a bunch, but he knows what's going to make me sound the best.
What about the analog digital warmth thing, which has been a supposed drawback and an argument against digital recording since the first digital recordings?
You see, the earlier ones, there was quite a difference. It's not near as much now. I mean, the quality of the digital recording is pretty damn good now. But Paquito Rivera, I did an album about a year and a half ago with Jane Monheit, and he played live on the record with us. So I don't know why that would have been a problem for him to only want to overdub. He didn't with us.
Because he didn't get along with Ignacio, that's why.
Oh, they don't get along. Oh, well then you got to hire two different people. You know.
It's like the Eagles. It's like the Eagles' separate planes.
Right, exactly. And the other thing
like
with
that.
microphones, you know, it depends on the vocal and the vocalist and what the sound is like. And I have 4 or 5 different microphones I use on vocalists. And